Hi, my name is Scott Woodbury. I'm here in the beautiful Whitmire Wildflower Garden at Shaw Nature Reserve, and we're going to talk about pruning trees and shrubs. The most important thing about pruning trees and shrubs is to do it during the dormant season. So try to get out there before the trees leaf out in spring. Winter is always a great time to do pruning. I love doing pruning in the winter because you can see all the branching structure on each of the plants. In the summertime, there's leaves all over the plants and you can't really see rubbing branches or crossing branches. And it's a great time to be outside and a good excuse to be outside in winter. The next most important thing is to have sharp tools. So I've got some of my favorite tools with me. Hand pruners come in left and right. If you're a lefty like I am, be sure to get a pair of left-handed pruners. And also be sure that the tool is extremely sharp. You might think that's really dangerous, but it's going to save you a lot of trouble. You always want to have neat cuts when you're pruning. The plants heal over a lot better because of that. Same is true with a pruning saw. Old saw blades are not good at all because you want to be able to cut as quickly and cleanly as possible. So be sure to replace old blades with new ones and be very careful because they are extremely sharp. It's always a good idea to have a scabbard to protect yourself. When the branches get a little too big, bigger for a pair of pruners anyway, we use loppers like these. There are all kinds of loppers, big and small. These are medium-sized pruners, loppers. There's some really big ones for big branch cutting and smaller ones for smaller branch cutting. I like this tool. This is a hand pruner that is on a long pole. So you can make cuts up high. This one is not very robust, but as long as the blade is sharp, you can make some pretty easy cuts with that. The last thing that we'll talk about is a pole saw. And so the name of the game with pole saws is getting them as light as possible. When they're too heavy, they're really too hard to use. So this one comes in 8 and 7 foot lengths. And so you can just put multiple pieces together to get it as long as you need it to be. Notice that it's got a hook on one side. This hook is great for pulling dead branches off. You don't necessarily have to cut every dead branch off, especially the smaller ones. You can pull them with this hook, and when they're dead, they snap right off. Some pole saws have a little hook on the end of the blade, and those hooks are great for pulling dead branches off too. All right, so we've got all the sharp tools, all the right equipment, and why don't we get started and do a couple demonstrations. I want you to learn how to cut a large branch safely, but first know that if it's bigger than 1.5 inches or 2 inches in diameter, you should consult an arborist. Anything that requires a chainsaw should probably require a professional to help you with the cut. Branches this size though, you can cut yourself. People might start with a cut down below, but when you do that, you risk tearing the bark down below. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a 3-cut removal. First we're going to cut underneath here, and then on top we're going to remove the large portion of the branch first, and then we're going to make the final cut closer to the trunk. So let's start with the undercut here. So we're just cutting a portion of the way through, maybe 1/5 of the way through, and now we're doing the overcut. There, now that we've got most of the weight removed, we're going to look for the branch collar, which is the swollen section of the trunk right here, and we're going to make the cut just above the branch collar. There, now we've got a nice perfect cut here. This is a cut that was made last year, and when you leave the bark collar, which is this zone on the branch right here, and then cut the branch off just beyond the bark collar, you get a really nice healing effect, like you see here. In 1 or 2 more years, the callus tissue will heal over the wound completely, and you won't even see the cut. Okay, so you oftentimes find branches rubbing up against one another. It's not a good idea, because what it eventually does is causes scarring on both branches, and that's usually something we want to avoid. So you can see on this Kentucky coffee tree that these 2 branches have been growing up against one another, rubbing each other. And so I think it's pretty obvious here which one to take out. We're going to be cutting the small branch, leaving the central trunk intact. So I've got the right tool for the job, a pair of loppers. This is a little too big for a hand pruner. Don't necessarily need a hand saw to cut this. But you do want to be careful because this branch is over your head, so you don't want it to fall on top of you. It's not a very big branch. So we'll step back, make the cut with a pair of loppers, and then we'll finish the cut off at the ground level. That's it. Here we have a Kentucky coffee tree that has grown a double leader. Double leaders are when there are 2 branches that are equal in height, and it's not a good idea to have a double leader. The problem is that the branch angle here is really narrow. These narrow branch angles will eventually result in a split branch, usually in a storm. And so you have to decide which branch you want to remove. If they're equal, then you can cut either one and it's probably going to be fine. In this case, they're not equal. The main trunk is quite a bit larger than the secondary trunk, so we're going to take the secondary trunk off. The other thing to take into consideration is if a branch is leaning toward a building, that should be the branch that you cut off. Or if it's heading toward the building, you want to cut it off because you don't want branches rubbing up against a house. All right, so what you want to do is take the weight off of this branch before you do the final cut. So what I'm going to do is take some of these smaller branches off to get them out of the way. And then we're going to do 3 cuts again. We're going to do 1 cut on the back side, and that back cut is to prevent the branch from peeling off. The second cut is going to be the main cut that cuts the branch off, and then the final cut is going to be down here. So we're only cutting about 1/5 of the way into the branch. So now we don't have any, we got all of the weight off the tree. There's 1 final cut down here at the bottom, and there won't be any peeling as a result of the removal of the weight. That's it. There are a number of trees that can either be pruned into a shrub or a tree, depending on which direction you want to go. So we're going to look at a couple of plants today. One that we want to prune into a tree. This bladder nut is going to be really great as it gets larger and fills out the space. It'll be in scale with this building behind it. And so in order to get it looking more like a tree, we need to clear out all of these suckers that are coming out of the ground. Branches that come out of the ground are called suckers. Branches that come off of another branch are called water sprouts. So keep that in mind. Let's first start by getting rid of all of the suckers that we can around the plant. Suckers are something that do eventually slow down over time. It might take 5 or 6 years for the suckers to stop coming up. It's usually a sign of juvenility. This is a young plant. Okay, so now that we've gotten most of the suckers out, you want to look at the interior of the plant, and this is when wintertime is really helpful. You can see the inside of the plant. Notice that there's some branches in here that are crossing and rubbing. And there's just a little bit too many branches on the interior of this tree. This is the fun part for me. I love going out in winter and looking at a plant, determining which branches need to be removed. Let me point out that when you're using a pair of pruners, you always want to cut with the cutting blade toward the trunk of the plant that you're pruning. And the reason for that is you get a more flush cut right along the trunk. If I turn the pruners over this way, the anvil is up against the trunk and the cutting blade is out further. So always cut with the blade close to the trunk. It's a little congested right over here. So we'll take that one out. Here's a rubbing branch right here. It's also a good idea to step back every now and then. There are too many branches right in this area here, so I'm gonna thin this out just slightly. It's much more open now. When a shrub gets big enough, it wants to grow into a tree. And in this particular setting, we want this shrub to remain as a low-growing screen. So the way to do that is we call it rejuvenate it. You take the oldest canes out and leave the youngest ones. So you can see the older trunks, they have this peely bark, which is really quite beautiful. I would encourage you to think about leaving some plants fully grown because the bark is really nice. This is arrowwood viburnum. But in this setting, we're going to be cutting out the old canes to make it really shrubby, to make a really good screen. So we're using our loppers here. We're going down low to the ground. Sometimes it's a little tricky to get the loppers in there. And we'll take this one. We'll take this one out. And I think we're going to take this one out too. Take this large cane out. Okay, so we're left with the smaller branches. These smaller canes are going to continue to grow. These really small ones next year will be this big. And then next year, or possibly in 2 years, we'll take old canes out again. So this process happens about every 2 years. One characteristic of juvenile oak trees is that they hold on to their leaves into winter, and they produce lots of water sprouts. All of these sprouts on the branches are all water sprouts. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean it up, get rid of some of the water sprouts, and when this tree matures in a few more years, it'll drop all of its leaves in the fall like all of the older trees. I think that gives you the idea that it really opens up the tree when you take all those water sprouts out. Thanks for coming out to the Whitmire Wildflower Garden to see this pruning demonstration. I hope that these tips have been helpful to you. Be safe when you're pruning your own trees at home, and get out in the wintertime. It's a lot of fun. It's a great time to be outside enjoying your garden.